In the bustling city of Bangalore, Nora and her close friend Sherry set out on an exciting adventure, but found themselves in the middle of a terrifying and disturbing event that changed their view of the world forever. After an arduous 18-hour overnight bus ride, they were extremely exhausted and in desperate need of rest and nourishment. With cloudy eyes and tired souls, they arrived at the hotel late in the evening. The journey had worn them out, and all they wanted was a hot meal, a warm bed, and a good night's sleep. They didn't yet know that the long-awaited respite would soon turn into a nightmarish ordeal. As they approached the receptionist's desk, they couldn't help but notice the anxious, lingering stares of the two men behind the counter. Those stares sent shivers running down their backs, but they brushed aside their concerns, deeming them mere paranoia brought on by fatigue. In their state of fatigue, they brushed off the discomfort and completed their check-in, around 11 p.m. As they lay in the dimly lit room enjoying the quiet of the unfamiliar city, a sudden terror came over them. The lights flickered and then went out, plunging the room into pitch blackness. Nora fumbled for the phone to call the front desk, but when she picked it up, there was no dial tone. The phone had been disconnected. Panic gripped the friends. They were alone, isolated in the dark, with an eerie feeling gnawing at the edges of their consciousness. It was at that moment that the doorknob to their room began to turn slowly, as if it had a life of its own. Nora's heart thundered in her chest and she held her breath. Turning on the flashlight on her phone, Nora carefully aimed the beam of light at the door, her hand trembling. What she saw sent shivers down her spine. The door slowly opened, and the shadowy figure of a man appeared on the other side. The silence was pierced by Sherry's startled scream, forcing Nora to act. She jumped up from the bed and pushed the door back into place with all her might. Outside, the man continued to rest against the door, his cold, determined eyes visible through the crack. Nora and Sherry, coming together in a battle of wills, pushed back against the door with equal determination. The struggle seemed to go on for what seemed like an eternity, adrenaline raging in their bodies as they tried to keep the intruder at bay. In a moment of respite, Nora managed to slam the door shut and quickly turned the lock. They stood panting and shivering, their faces illuminated by the eerie blue glow of Nora's phone. The relief was short-lived. However, a few minutes later they heard the disturbing sound again. The man on the other side had a key and was unlocking the door. The sound of tumblers being pushed in echoed ominously in the silence of the room. Panic gripped Nora as she realized the full implications of this discovery. How did this man have the key to their room? With a pounding heart, she took a deep breath and gathered all her strength. Mustering up her courage, she began pounding on the door, shouting, "Get the hell out! Help! Somebody help us!" There was terror and desperation in her voice, hoping that someone, anyone, would come to their aid. Fearing for their lives, Nora and Sherry managed to call the police, who arrived at the hotel shortly after their frantic call. But to their horror, the police officers were unmoved by their distress. The friends recounted their horrific events, but the response of the police officers was discouragingly lukewarm. The police officers left without conducting a thorough investigation or providing any assistance. Left to themselves, Nora and Sherry continued to huddle in a room equipped with a makeshift barricade to protect the door. The night stretched on, but sleep was only a distant dream. Every creak, every whisper of wind, every flicker of shadows seemed to herald a new threat. With each passing moment they could not stop wondering what horrors lurked in the darkness beyond the door and whether they would survive the night. As the first rays of dawn painted the room in soft shades of gray, Nora and Sherry couldn't help but wonder what had happened that long, terrible night. Who was the man with the key? And why didn't the police take their ordeal seriously? The events of that night will forever remain in their minds, as a chilling reminder that danger can lurk in even the most unexpected places, and make them forever question the intentions of those around them. Lucas had been on the road for hours, driving through the relentless downpour that had accompanied him on his journey. He had to attend a crucial morning class the next day, so he had no choice but to book a hotel room for the night. As he entered the lobby of the Pinaview Inn, he felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him, and the enticing thought of a warm, comfortable bed was almost too much to resist. The receptionist at the front desk checked him in with a friendly smile, and Lucas made his way to room 214, guided by the flickering neon signs in the dimly lit corridor. It had been a long day, and all he wanted was a good night's sleep before his early morning class. However, as he opened the door to his room, he was met with a pungent, acrid smell that made his eyes water. The room was enveloped in a thick cloud of smoke, and it was evident that someone had been smoking inside. Lucas was a non-smoker, and the thought of spending the night in a room that reeked of cigarette smoke was not at all appealing. Frowning, Lucas picked up the phone and dialed the front desk. "Hello," he said, his voice tired but firm. "I've just checked into room 214, and it smells like someone's been smoking in here." It definitely wasn't me. The receptionist apologized and assured Lucas that they would send someone up to address the issue. Lucas hung up the phone and decided to take a quick shower while he waited for the problem to be resolved. The warm water helped alleviate some of his fatigue, but he still longed for a good night's rest. After his shower, Lucas returned to the room, hoping that the smell of smoke had dissipated. He glanced at the uninviting bed and decided to give it a try. Exhaustion finally overcame his discomfort, and he crawled beneath the sheets. As he settled in, a creeping feeling of unease washed over him. He shifted in the bed, trying to get comfortable, and then his foot brushed against something cold and cylindrical. Frowning in the darkness, he reached down and grabbed the object. It was small, and at first, he thought it might be a pen. His mind was hazy with sleep, and he figured it could be useful for his morning class. So, he tossed it onto the nightstand and drifted off into slumber. Morning came all too quickly. Lucas awoke, groggy and disoriented, and struggled to motivate himself to get out of bed. He had a long day ahead of him, and the hotel room's unpleasant aroma still lingered in the air. As he prepared for his class, he remembered the small, cylindrical object he had found at the foot of the bed the night before. Curiosity got the better of him, and he reached over to the nightstand, grabbing the object he had dismissed as a pen. He pulled back the crumpled sheet and examined it in the morning light. His heart began to race as he realized it wasn't a pen at all. It was a small, red pipe. A chill ran down his spine. Lucas had no doubt about what he was holding in his hand. It was a narcotic pipe, used for smoking illicit substances. Panic gripped him as he realized the implications of this discovery. The room he had been given was undoubtedly used for nefarious purposes, and he had slept in it. Oblivious to the danger he had been in, Lucas knew he had to act fast. He picked up his phone and called the front desk, his voice trembling with anxiety. He explained what he had found in his room and the gravity of the situation. The receptionist was equally alarmed and told Lucas they would send someone to investigate right away. Within minutes, the hotel manager arrived at his room, accompanied by a security guard. They inspected the pipe and quickly grasped the severity of the situation. The manager offered Lucas a full refund for his stay, apologizing profusely for the mix-up and the danger he had unknowingly been exposed to. Lucas accepted the refund, his thoughts racing. He couldn't help but wonder how such a dangerous item had ended up in his room. The answer was clear: the previous occupant, presumably the one responsible for the smoke, had left it behind. It was a disturbing thought that made him shudder. In the heart of Singapore, a bustling city where the splendor of modernity blends seamlessly with cultural heritage, there was a hotel. It was a place that attracted both the wealthy and the adventurous. Located in the heart of one of the city's most dubious neighborhoods, the facade of the hotel was graced with a stately appearance. But as one delved deeper into its interior, the extravagance faded, revealing hints of a troubled past. Nancy, a woman of intrigue and mystery, had taken up residence in this hotel. Her reasons for staying in such an ambiguous place were known only to herself. She had a penchant for the mysterious, a thirst for the unusual, and an amazing ability to stumble upon oddities. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows on the maze of city streets, Nancy wandered into the hotel. The lobby was dimly lit and the atmosphere was heavy with some peculiar aura. Nancy sensed that something was wrong, but couldn't figure out what it was. As she approached the elevator, Nancy noticed a man standing waiting. He looked to be in his early 30s and dressed casually. However, he made no attempt to press the elevator button, which struck Nancy as odd. She brushed off her initial alarm, assuming he was probably preoccupied with his thoughts. Sighing impatiently, Nancy reached out and pressed the button herself. The man barely paid her any attention, She figured. It was probably just another inattentive fellow traveler. The elevator door opened and they stepped inside. Nancy pressed her floor button, but the man made no movement. The elevator began to rise, and Nancy couldn't escape the feeling of paranoia. Years of playing a game called SS-13 had accustomed her to scrutinizing every slightest action of those around her. Various possibilities flashed through her mind, but she was hesitant to jump to conclusions just yet. Perhaps, she thought, they were going to the same floor. When the elevator doors opened on her floor, Nancy stepped out and so did the man. She couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was wrong. The corridors on this floor split into two pots, and Nancy hesitated for a moment, trying to decide which way to go. The man had not yet chosen his path, but he was watching her every move. Terror covered her like a shroud when she finally chose a direction. The man didn't lead, but followed her, never lagging a step behind. Nancy's heart pounded as the winding corridors seemed to stretch on forever. She couldn't escape the thought that this was how she might meet her end. With each turn, Nancy's paranoia grew stronger. The man continued to tail her, a silent sentinel in the dimly lit passageways. She didn't dare look him in the eye, but she felt his presence like an invisible noose tightening around her neck. Finally, Nancy decided to take a chance. She turned sharply and headed in the other direction, away from the man's eyes. Panic gripped her when she realized he was still following her, his footsteps echoing in the narrow hallway. Despair gripped her. Trembling with fear and anticipation, she fumbled for the room key. With a trembling hand, she slid the key into the lock and rushed inside, slamming the door behind her. Her heart raced and she felt a rush of relief that she was safe for now. A man's voice could be heard on the other side of the door, rising with annoyance and shouting as if she had committed a serious crime. Breathless, she remained hiding in her room, praying that he would eventually give up and leave. The night passed in agonizing silence, and Nancy hesitated to leave the confines of her room. Every creak of the hotel, every whisper of wind outside the window, every imaginary sound increased her anxiety. At last morning came, and a faint ray of sunlight broke through the curtains. The room was dimly lighted, and Nancy could still hear the faint echoes of footsteps in the hallway outside the window. She plucked up her courage and stepped outside, all senses alert. She stepped out into the hallway, her heart pounding in her chest. The man was nowhere to be seen. She couldn't help but wonder what his intentions were and what made him pursue her so persistently. Unanswered questions lingered, reminding her of the disturbing events of the previous night. After traveling for 6 months, Matthew and his girlfriend Olivia were both tired of shabby accommodations and unsettling places to stay. Their journey had taken them through rugged terrains, bustling cities, and remote villages, and they had encountered their fair share of discomfort along the way. But now, they had reached a point where they longed for a bit of luxury and comfort. The decision to seek respite came after a fateful car accident that left Matthew bruised and barely able to move. It was a jarring incident, but it ultimately brought about the need for a proper rest and some pampering. Matthew, ever the practical one, decided that it was time to treat themselves to a lavish hotel stay. As he lay on the side of the road, waiting for the tow truck to arrive, he turned to Olivia and said, "Liv, I think it's time we splurge a bit. Find the nicest hotel you can, and ask for those crisp white sheets we always dreamt of." With Matthew's encouragement, Olivia began her search for the perfect hotel. They were in a quaint town nestled in the mountains, and it didn't take long for her to discover a charming, grand hotel. Its name, the White Haven, sounded promising, and the images on the website showcased pristine white sheets, elegant furnishings, and a breathtaking view of the surrounding peaks. She made the reservation, and despite the photos revealing an impeccably maintained reception, Olivia couldn't help but notice that the man at the front desk appeared somewhat out of place. He lay curled up in a sleeping bag near the front desk, snoring lightly. She assumed he was a security guard who doubled as a night receptionist. Despite this odd sight, they were both too exhausted to care. They thanked the drowsy receptionist, who mumbled something incoherent in response, and headed to their room. The elegant interior and the immaculate white sheets were a welcome sight, and they both sank into the plush mattress with a sigh of relief. Olivia had done it. she had found their oasis of comfort. As the night settled in and the couple drifted into a deep sleep, the serenity of the moment seemed too good to be true. That nagging feeling, a small whisper of doubt, remained in the back of their minds. A few hours later, Matthew and Olivia woke abruptly, disturbed by a itching sensation all over their bodies. Both sat up in the dimly lit room, swatting at their skin, trying to understand the source of their discomfort. Panic set in as they realized they were not alone in the bed. The sheets that had looked so pristine upon their arrival now concealed a horrifying secret. Tiny ticks, no bigger than grains of sand, crawled across the white fabric, while bed bugs, swollen with their blood, used a grotesque image of their parasitic feast. Matthew and Olivia leaped from the bed, their skin crawling and minds racing. They could hardly believe their eyes as they stared in disbelief at the one-spear sheets now stained with their own blood. This was no sanctuary, it was a nightmare in the guise of a dream. Frantically, they stripped the bed, throwing the tainted linens and bedding to the floor. The relentless itch and sting of bites intensified with every moment. As they inspected themselves for signs of infestation, panic set in, and they knew they had to escape this ghastly place. As they hurriedly dressed, Olivia picked up her phone, intending to confront the hotel's reception about the gruesome ordeal. She dialed the number but was met with an eerie silence. No dial tone, no reception, nothing. It was as if they were entirely cut off from the outside world. Dylan and Candace had been looking forward to a weekend getaway down south for weeks. The quaint town they had chosen had a rustic charm that beckoned, and they had found a lovely old hotel that promised a quiet and romantic getaway. It was a charming relic of a bygone era with creaky wooden floors and antique furniture, perfect for a couple looking for a break from the hustle and bustle. The couple had just checked into the hotel and the sun was already beginning to descend over the horizon, casting a warm orange glow over the city. Candace, anticipating the upcoming weekend, hurried to the bathroom to freshen up after the long drive, while Dylan began unpacking his suitcases. Dylan carefully arranged his clothes in the antique closet, hanging his favorite shirt he planned to wear to a special dinner on the rack. He heard Candace humming a pleasant tune as she wiped her hands and smiled to himself, realizing how lucky he was to have her in his life. But his pleasant thoughts were interrupted by a sudden blood-chilling scream coming from the bathroom. Fear gripped him, and he rushed toward the source of the scream with his heart pounding in his chest. He swung open the bathroom door and saw a sight that sent shivers down his spine. Candace was standing there, her face pale and contorted with terror, her trembling finger pointing at the ceiling. Dylan followed her trembling hand and only then saw a gaping hole in the ceiling, an uneven tear in the aging plaster. But it wasn't just the hole that sent shivers down his spine. It was what he saw through it, the single, angry eye staring back at them. Panic gripped Dylan, and he realized that someone had been watching his girlfriend in the bathroom all this time. Open-mouthed, the man's face contorted into a sinister grin, revealing yellowed, crooked teeth. He muttered something inaudible, and in a flash, he pulled his eye out of the hole, disappearing from sight. Dylan didn't have time to react before he heard the thunder of hurried footsteps from the roof. Fear and adrenaline overwhelmed him, and he darted away, grabbing Candace's trembling hand. He pulled her out of the bathroom and hurriedly closed the door behind them. He whispered to her, "We have to get out of here now." Together they tore toward the door of the room. Dylan fumbled with the lock, but finally managed to open it, and they hurried down the dimly lit hallway. The antique furnishings of the hotel seemed to take on an ominous sound, and their footsteps echoed in the narrow corridor. They reached a flight of stairs and quickly made their way down, the dim emergency lights casting eerie shadows. Their hearts pounded and they realized they had to call for help. Descending to the first floor, Dylan fumbled for his cell phone and dialed 911. He quickly explained the situation to the operator, and the operator assured him that the police would be right there. Shocked, they made their way to the lobby where they encountered the hotel's elderly night clerk, Mr. Beaumont. He was a frail man with gray hair and a kind smile. He looked worriedly at Dylan and Candace, recounting what had happened in their room. "I've never heard of anything like that happening here," he said, and his voice shook. "We have a small, quiet town. I'll lock up the hotel and wait for the police with you." Finally, the police arrived, led by a stern-looking officer named Detective Simmons. He questioned Dylan and Candace at length, took statements from them, and assured them that he would conduct a thorough investigation. They watched the officers go upstairs and examine their room. Several hours passed as the investigators combed the hotel. In the end, they found nothing but a makeshift nest of blankets and scraps of clothing on the roof, indicating that someone had been living there unnoticed.